All right, good evening and happy Wednesday, everyone. It was a beautiful day today. So I'd like to welcome you all to April's session of our Female Leadership Series. The Women and Girls Task Force is incredibly excited for these monthly sessions, and we're so happy that you've been able to join us tonight and are taking the time out of your busy schedule. My name is Janice Kugel, and I am the participation lead at Sport Nova Scotia. I am also a rugby coach, an athlete, a board member, and like many of you, a female leader. I'm so honored to be the lead for the Women and Girls Task Force and the MC of this evening's event. In addition to Sport Nova Scotia, I would like to thank the following partners who've helped shape this extraordinary event: the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, Support for Sport, Nova Scotia Gaming, and the Government of Nova Scotia, the Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage. On behalf of the Women and Girls Task Force and our partners, I would like to acknowledge that our offices are located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We're aware that there may be participants joining from all over and welcome you to share where you currently reside. A little housekeeping before we get started. So for the duration of the panel, please turn off your camera and mute yourself to reduce background noise and feedback. During the networking session after the event, we'll invite you to turn your camera back on so that you can see everyone. I also encourage you to change your Zoom viewing to speaker view. This can be done by clicking the gallery view button at the top of your screen and changing it to presenter view. Please also change your visible username to your full name. And if you are a coach and would like some locker credit for tonight's PD session, please also add your locker NCCP number after your first and last name. I also ask that you direct any questions to the chat box. If you want to speak aloud, simply use the raise your hand function or indicate so in the chat box. We'll call on you when we have the opportunity for you to speak. If you'd like to submit an anonymous question, please do so. You can private chat myself, or you can private chat our other host, Kirsty Mason. Her name is host, Kirsty Mason. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties or have any other general questions, please message Kirsty. This brings us to my very next slide. Please actively participate in our polls. So Kirsty, if you want to launch that poll there, I'd love to know where you're joining us from and what your role is in sport. And you can choose more than one role if you are like me and play a few. Great, so it looks like we're almost there. We've got 50% of folks joining us from the Central region. We have 3 from the Valley. We've got 4 from outside of Nova Scotia and 1 from outside of Canada. So welcome. We would love to hear where you're joining us from. If you want to throw that into the chat box, that would be fantastic. And then as far as role in sport, we have 50% volunteer and 50% athlete. So those are our 2 biggest ones. Fantastic. Really exciting there. Kirsty, I'll get you to close that down for me. Sharing the results. You can all see there, 44% from the Central region and 5 folks from outside of Nova Scotia. So that is awesome. Great. I coach in Nova Scotia and live in New Brunswick. Awesome. And Andrea from Ottawa. Welcome everyone. In Florida. Fabulous. You have much nicer weather than we do right now. Okay, so let's get started. I'm happy to announce that we have 3 fantastic inspirational female leaders joining us today. But before they share their story in their own words, I'd like to introduce them. Camille Frenette. Camille is a Canadian para-triathlete and a third-year pharmacy student at Dalhousie University. She was born with a club foot, a birth defect in which her right foot was turned inwards. She underwent surgery as an infant to reposition the foot and lengthen the tissues. And even with a successful procedure, Camille's affected side remained significantly smaller and weaker from the knee down. Camille's parents raised her to overcome her condition in every way. As a young girl, she played a multitude of sports. Her journey as a triathlete began in 2012, following in her dad's footsteps. The sport has since become her passion. Her parasport journey began in 2016 when she was first approached by the national team coach, Carolyn Murray. In her first 4 years on the international stage, the 24-year-old athlete has raced all around the globe and is currently ranked 4th on the international stage. Camille strives to be the best female para-triathlete in the world while being an ambassador not only for her country, but for her sport and for people born with a club foot. She embarked on her journey with the vision of inspiring young people with disabilities to achieve greatness and push their limits. Welcome, Camille. Zoe, welcome Zoe. Zoe Robinson. Zoe is a chartered professional accountant and the Director of Corporate Services for the College of Physiotherapists of Ontario. She currently sits on 3 nonprofit board of directors, serving as the Chair of Finance, Audit and Risk Committee for one association, and the Chair of the Governance and Nominations Committee for another. She's the former CEO of Freestyle Canada and the Canadian Ski Patrol. She's also a transgender woman. Zoe came out in November of 2018, began living her authentic identity in January of 2019, and started medically transitioning in March of 2020. Welcome, Zoe. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Claudine Bonner. Dr. Claudine Bonner is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Women and Gender Studies program at Acadia University. Her research is grounded in history and broadly applied in analysis of race, gender, education, and identity in contemporary Canada. She's been a lifelong athlete and has translated this love of sport into her scholarship. Her course, The Critical Sociology of Sport, looks to sport as a socializing agent of collective action and teamwork and a medium of entertainment and leisure. During the pandemic, Dr. Bonner has been researching sport in the history of the African Nova Scotian community, from the Colored Hockey League to colored whaler races on Lake Bannock at the turn of the century. Fantastic. Welcome, Claudine. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to stop sharing this screen so that we can ask all of these wonderful ladies some fabulous questions. And let's start with Camille. I would love for all of you to share your story of how you've gotten where you are today and how your background and your unique perspective has either helped or hindered your journey in sport. So we'll start with Camille.
All right. Hi, everybody. So basically, Janice, you did a really good job at basically saying my story, but I am a Canadian para-triathlete. As she said, I was born with a club foot. And I guess the thing for me was more around accepting that that was a disability and accepting that I could be a para-athlete. And that really took me a while. So after the Canadian national team had reached out to me and asked me if I was willing to go get tested and see if I was a little bit eligible to be a para triathlete, I actually backed off and was like, no, I'm really not willing to do that right now. And it was more so a problem of self-acceptance at that point. So I took a year, I really took a step back and really changed my perspective around seeing my disability as an opportunity rather than a limit, really. And yeah, and it was the best decision I've ever made. I got to travel the world and now I'm trying to go to Tokyo. So yeah, I would say that's what I had to say for this question.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Camille. Zoe, we'll go to you next.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I'd just like to point out that today is an International Day of Pink. It was serendipitous that this conversation's happening today, and you know, we're all hopefully allies around the fight against homophobia, transphobia, and bullying of all kind against the LGBTQIS. Okay, the alphabet soup of people. Sorry. It changes all. Yeah, sorry. And I think it's great that we have a bunch of women leaders joining us today. So my story is, it took me 54 years to realize who I really was and to find my authentic self as Zoe. And as said in my biography, I came to that realization November 12th, 2018, and have taken all the steps away in order to live my life fully as a woman. Recognize that I'm a trans woman, and I'm quite proud of that, and very proud to share that. But I do admit that my journey through sport was as a privileged white educated male from a middle class family. And yes, all those things are true in terms of the baggage that I bring along with me. And so my experience as a transgender woman is very different from other people, from other transgender people, male, female, or non-binary, gender non-conforming individuals who are probably certainly younger than me, or who have spent a very large portion of their life, if they're older, as a person that is different from their sex assigned at birth. So my career is been in freestyle skiing. I was an athlete. I was a coach. I've been an administrator for most of my career. As I said, I was an executive within the National Sport Organization community. I've been chair as a board of director. I'm a chartered professional accountant, and so I bring all that around with me. And so I think what I do know is that my perspective has always been curious around being open, wanting to involve more women always. I remember standing up in a Canadian Olympic Committee meeting probably was 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and announcing that we were having board of directors elections. And I said, I want the women in this room to submit their applications, because at the end of the day, we needed more women on our board of directors, because it was really, really important at that point, and it just wasn't being talked about publicly. And I thought it was very important to put that stake in the ground. So it's been a part of me all my life, obviously, and it's been a very important part of my career in advocating for women's rights, ensuring that they have a role in sport, a positive role in sport, and that they're respected for the great leaders that they are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zoe. And yeah, it's fantastic to have your perspective here this evening. So welcome. Claudine, I will throw it over to you to add to your story and give us a bit of insight onto how your background has helped or hindered your journey.
Okay, so I'm trying to fight a cat off as I speak, but I've taken this question to be more about my story as it relates specifically to sport, and nothing else in my life, because I could talk forever here. But I think I am and have always been a recreational and sometimes competitive athlete. The word athlete is something that's been a part of my self-concept for as long as I can remember. I've lived in Ontario, Nova Scotia, in East Africa, in the US, the UK, and the Caribbean. And in all those places, I've carried my love of sport with me. As a child, my parents signed me up for soccer and tennis. I ran track and did gymnastics. I cheered. I played netball at school, which probably dates me. Later, I joined my local canoe club, and I discovered a lifelong love for paddling, which later in life allowed me to embrace the Dragon Boat Club crew community in Toronto for about a decade, and to the sport of outrigger canoe racing, which is a big part of what I still continue to do. At university, I ran track, I found the weight room, and I started competing in fitness. I dabbled in boxing, and in all honesty, I'm sure that doesn't cover all my experiences in sport. It doesn't talk about, my foray into CrossFit for 5 minutes, or my attempts at powerlifting for 5 minutes. But I think I've made my point. My point is that I've been lucky enough to have sport as an integral part of my life, and to have been privileged enough to have the means to try what I wanted. today, in terms of sport and recreation, I've managed to translate that love of sport into my scholarship, whereas as was said in the intro, I do research on the sporting histories of Black communities in Canada. And I also teach a course called Power Games, which is a critical sociology of sport. I'm also a founding member of a group that works to encourage Black, Indigenous, and other women of color to participate in sport and recreation in whatever ways they're able. I organized a group trip to Cape Breton a couple of years ago, where we went hiking, to see the fall colors, the usual thing. And near the end of the weekend, one of the women said, "Thank you for doing this. I've never done this before." And I thought she meant she'd never been to Cape Breton. What she meant was she had never been hiking. And we started a conversation around what are the things that you've done in terms of sport in your life. And it brought me to an acknowledgement of the ways that people can be shut out of or unable to participate in sport and recreation in our society, raising the issues of access across the spectrum of ability and different social identities, like who has access to what spaces. And it reminded me of the reality that in most of the spaces that I've described for myself in my own life, there were few, if ever, any other people who looked like me. And it reminded me of people always saying to myself and to my brother and to other people in my family, Black people don't play insert whatever sport here, right? So it was one of those things that I needed to be reminded of. So that's kind of my story as to why it's important, I think, for me to be here and to be having this conversation today.
That's awesome. Your sport journey sounds a lot like mine, Claudine. Insert rugby for the water sport. So,
Yep.
so I feel that, and I certainly appreciate the opportunities that I've been able to have, and acknowledge that they are certainly not the opportunities of everyone else. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here. We're going to jump right into some more deeper dive type questions. So. These ones are a little bit more thought-provoking for our panelists. So let's start with why, and the big why. Why diversity or inclusion in sport is important. And why do you think it's important from your perspective? Yeah, and we'll start with Zoe on this one. Zoe, you're muted still.
Oh yes, the greatest. The what have we've all heard that. I'm sorry, you're on mute. You're muted. The last year. So sport really is a part of everyone's life, or it really should be part of everyone's life. And I think Claudine pointed out that there are barriers to access and barriers to spaces for certain people that may not be privileged socioeconomically, may not be privileged through biases, either unconscious or overt, that people have around participation. I think Claudine's commentary about Black people don't participate in XYZ, and certainly in winter sport, I think that's even a greater concern. They have, particularly in skiing, which is where I come from. And I think that it's important that people have access to sport, that everybody have access to sport, for not only the physical and mental benefits that come from it, but from a social benefit, because it is community. And every one of us here can think about the communities that we've built, the friendships we've made, the colleagues with whom we've worked, the opportunities that have maybe grown from participating in sport at the recreational or high performance level, and that everybody in Canada should have the opportunity to benefit from that. I know for transgender people, and even myself, that there are barriers that can be created. For me personally, things like change room facilities are really quite important. And I've talked about this publicly in the past, and that it's a significant barrier for particularly trans women who have not gone through gender confirmation surgery to go into those very safe private spaces that exist. And so facilities aren't built the way they need to be for those type of things. So I think that we want people to be able to benefit from what sport has to offer at the recreational and community level. And so breaking down those barriers, being open-minded, being inclusive, welcoming people who are different from you. I think really understanding and learning about your unconscious biases and how those play a role in how we make decisions or perceive the world and treat people, I think is really important. There's lots of research around that in terms of how we can learn about that and stop ourselves and think a little more. So that's why I think diversity and inclusion is really important. So everyone benefits from it. At the board level, the research is really clear. In terms of gender diversity, corporations do better. And that's both at the corporate level, on the public, at the public corporate level, publicly exchanged, stock exchange listed companies. It's very clear. And I think that in sport, sport is lucky, I think, that we're seeing more and more women, although it's still a challenge. Like prior to this year, the Hockey Canada board was a bunch of old white men. And one of my colleagues put up a LinkedIn group and a call for more women to apply for those positions. And I believe now there's 2 or 3 women that have now been named to the Hockey Canada board. So that's good, but it's only a beginning. And so the inclusion of more women is important, but I think we need to have the inclusion of more women with what we do with intersectionality in terms of the race and the socioeconomic experience, and whether the LGBTQ and just different life experiences that having a bunch of white men and white women who come from university classes and come from well-heeled families. Yes, you have a bit of diversity there, but absolutely not enough. And the reason why it's important is because you need the diversity of opinion. And so there's people there who will see the question from a different point of view, will raise questions, will ask hard questions to get people to think about how the policies and programs impact those who are participating in sport within their organization. That happens and is led from the board level, and you've got to lead from the top, and tone from the top is really important. So the board is not doing it. Why should the rest of the sport community within that NSO or PSO or that club be open to those things? So yeah, I'm a little opinionated, sorry.
No, that's okay, that's great. And I love the diversity of opinion, and I'll add in like the diversity of opinion and diversity of experience. We will never truly know what is needed at a community level if we don't have people to have those voices at the board level, which is fantastic. Claudine or Camille, anything you would like to add around why do you think diversity and inclusion is important, especially at the board level? Claudine, go for it.
I'm just thinking because in lots of ways, I think Zoe did an amazing job of summing up so many of the points that need to be made. I think it's important in terms of not just participation or inclusion in sport at the board level and as athletes, but in terms of volunteering and coaching as well. I think diversity in coaching and leadership throughout sport is vital because the big thing for me is the question of representation. The importance of recognizing that seeing people who look like you or who belong to whatever group you belong to works to, I think Camille said it in her intro about the importance of representing people who look like her or have her experience in sport, because it provides affirmation, it provides confirmation that you too belong in that space. So I think that's vital as well, the importance of representation. I can stop there.
Yeah, that's great. Seeing people who look like you, that see her, be her. We hear it all the time, but it doesn't just
Yeah.
apply to see her, be her. It's seeing people who look like you or have that experience. Camille, I see you nodding your head. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I feel like you guys did a really good job. I think, yeah, just that representation piece. I think just myself, if I had known or seen people with clubfoot competing at that level, I maybe would not have hesitated a year. So I think just representation is super important.
Awesome. How do you ladies think we can shift the needle? How can we make our boards and our leadership positions be more diverse? Claudine, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I think organizations tend to work really hard to maintain and replicate themselves. We have a tendency to recruit and hire from within our social groups and within our pools, right? We hire our friends and people who we've met through our networking opportunities and so on. So if sport hasn't traditionally been inclusive, we're not going to have diversity on boards and in leadership positions. But I think shifting the needle has never been difficult. I think it's a question of willingness. I think groups that have traditionally not been led into the sport, into various sports, have tended to create their own spaces. And a willingness to reach out into those organizations for board members and for former athletes should broaden diversity in membership. I think it's possible to invite communities and community members who haven't traditionally been present, provide incentives for their participation, provide spaces that honor and recognize their diversity, educate your membership about that diversity, and model and practice respect for that, for any kind of difference. I think those are steps that would lead to better being able to diversify your space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the providing honor and honoring their spaces and providing that education to not just to your board, but to the rest of your membership, to your athletes, to make sure that that everyone's on the same page and that everyone kind of comes from a place of mutual understanding or gets to a place of mutual understanding. I think that that's awesome.
Yeah.
Camille, what do you think? How can we work to be more diverse?
I honestly, from like a board perspective, I haven't really been on boards or anything like that. So I might not have the best opinion, but for me, it's just, yeah, I mean, I guess for us to stand up for ourselves and explain what we think, how we think the changes should be. And I feel like in general, like when you like changing a direction like that, usually when, I don't know, people are decently well receiving if you bring it up in a good way. So I think just opening up the conversation in general is kind of my.
Yeah, I think that's good. Like opening it up, people are willing to receive and willing to be invited, but you have to put it out there. You have to put it out that you're open to new voices and to new faces and to new folks, which is fantastic. So thank you. Zoe, same question.
I'm not normally the rebel in the room. But what I would say is that I think more organizations are open to reaching out to other communities, but Claudine is absolutely right. And this has been a problem in governance, is that we search for people that look like us, have same backgrounds by us, have same experience of us. And so it's just, we talk to our own inner chamber, our own echo chamber when we sit around the tables. And sometimes people don't know to reach out because they don't see a problem about that. So I honestly believe that, like Samantha Rogers did, who's the person I was talking about, who put the campaign up on LinkedIn to advocate for more women on the Hockey Canada board. Sometimes you just got to beat the bushes, yell from the hilltop, throw rocks at the glass houses, and break them down because they don't listen. And at the same time, you need very vocal advocates who are willing to take a stand. You need people inside as well that are willing to that are willing to help with change as well. And because if they don't, if there's not leadership inside, no matter what is being yelled at from the outside by the advocates, things won't change. And so that inside part is really important. And I just want to relate, and I talk about this quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg all the time when I talk, because I think it's really important that if you want to move the needle, she talks about how, quote, you fight for things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And what she's basically saying is, you can advocate as loudly as you want, but if you can't get people on side to help move that needle with you, you'll never succeed. And so, but you need both. You can't just have the quiet people in the background doing it. You need them plus the loud people out in front, and they work together in order to find thoughtful ways to make change. And so if you feel that your sport board, your club board, your NSO board is not reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusion, knock on the door and knock and rap really loudly, because you know what? That's how you begin to make change.
That's fantastic, and I love that quote. I'll add a bit to that, in that Canadian Women in Sport, for those on the call, has done a lot of research in this area as well, and they've actually said that 30% is the minimum number of female seats. They focus on gender equity, but 30% is the minimum number of female seats on a board for females to feel like they're in a space that they can actually say and do and make changes. So staying away from that tokenism, and that, you know, we have one or two females on our board, or we have one or two people that represent this group, or one or two people that represent this group, but we're good, we're high five us, we're doing really great. Tokenism is what we want to avoid, and that, like, that 30% number is the minimum standard. Like, if you don't even have that, then you're not doing it. So yeah.
And can I just add to that? I think, because I've worked with some women to try to be on more boards and take female leadership positions within organizations, the tokenism part is really important. No one person speaks for a group of people. You speak for your experience. And I think that's important to understand. And I think that the last thing anybody wants, you know, whether it's me as a transgender woman or women in general, is that, oh, we want you on the board because, you know, you check off the box for diversity. It's insulting when people do that. And it's grossly unfair to the individuals who are being approached in order to sit on the board. Yeah, so yes, I'm sorry, I'm opinionated on this type of stuff. And and I know from talking to people is women want to be selected because they're bright, ambitious, successful, experienced, knowledgeable, and they're women. But it comes at the end of the sentence. Not, I'm a woman and I'm this. And I think that's important to understand, that, you know, stand up for your skills, knowledge, experiences, profile, education, whatever you have to bring to the table. That's more important than the gender that you have.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Anything that we would like to add before I move to the next question? No? I will also put a reminder out to the folks on the call that we will open the floor for questions. So feel free to, if you've got something that you want to ask the group, write it down so that you can ask them, or send it to us and we'll ask them for you. What advice would you give your younger self that would make you be more authentically you, or you feel would have helped you in your journey so far? Because your journeys are far from over. Camille, let's start with you.
Sure. I think that the main thing for me, I think from, I don't know, I guess the era that we live in with social media and the appearance of having such a perfect life, I think that's one thing that really affected me in accepting who I was and that I did have a disability. So I think if I had one advice, it's just that everyone, maybe not everyone, but most people probably have a little something about themselves that they're not super comfortable about, or that they're, whether it's, I don't know, it can be anything, a learning disability or just a physical disability like me, or I don't know, everyone's battling a little something about themselves, and it's not because what you see on social media or what they portray or how they present themselves so confidently, it doesn't mean that they don't have a little something. And it's totally, it's awesome to have a little something. It's like what makes you you, and to embrace it, because it will bring you amazing opportunities. So that's definitely what I would tell myself, or tell a younger person.
That's awesome. Embrace
Yeah.
you. That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Claudine?
Okay. That actually made me smile. I think I would tell her that those people that are saying the things like I was saying before, that Black people don't, insert thing here, just haven't met the ones that do. And that there are different kinds of Black girls. And I'd tell her to seek out those who aren't limited in their ability to envision the possible. I tell her to seek out mentors who are able and willing to support her on her journey. And I'd also tell her not to allow like the tropes or the myths and stereotypes about Blackness and about Black women and girls in general to make her feel the need to be small.
I love that. Find your people, embrace your you, and find people who are willing to build you up. Don't find the people who care about tearing you down. That's
You
amazing.
got it. You got it.
Zoe.
Claudine said it all, so I grew up in the 1970s, and for let alone the LGBT community as a whole, it was a do not talk. It was not a don't ask, don't tell. It was just don't talk. You don't exist. I think what I would tell myself today, if I had the opportunity again, is to embrace who you are. Find the support. If you don't have it at home, it's hard. I get that. But be brave enough to know that you've got a long life ahead of you. Yeah, it is going to be challenges, but embrace who you are. Sorry, Fox News. I only have Fox News because I like to see the other side of the boat. But embrace who you are, and accept who you are, and be proud to. If you're a young boy who assigned male at birth, and you like to wear girls' clothing and wear your hair longer, and because you clearly identify as a girl, go for it. But find the support. And it's hard to tell a youth that, hey, it'll be better when you're in your 20s and 30s, because they can't get to being 20. They can't even get to being out of high school, for Pete's sake, let alone what it's going to be like when you're an adult. Bad people. So and I think that it's but find the friends around you who will support you. Leave the friends who don't support you, because they don't deserve to be your friends. And your peers are so important. If you can find a group of people with whom you connect and who support you and you support them, your life will go along a whole lot better.
I agree. So I'm looking down at my participant list, and I recognize most of the names on the list. So thank you for sharing that with me, Zoe. Most of the women on our call tonight are involved, or quite a few of them are level, and a lot of them at our provincial sport board level. So we have some fabulous women. What advice would you give to them in helping move their sport forward, or helping move their board forward? I might give you. Yeah, you can start, Zoe.
Don't take no for an answer. Find your allies around the table. That's really important. I go back to the Ginsburg quote. You can't do it yourself, and you'll just burn yourself out and you'll leave. And that's a loss for your organization. So find your allies. I think that be thoughtful about the sequence of how you want to introduce stuff. Understand that you may not hit the home run at the beginning. In fact, more than likely, you won't hit the home run if you can get to first base on a single, and then continue to add more bases along the way. I'm trying to use sport metaphors. That you build as you go along. And I think if you look at this social change, that kind of the theory of change, which is a very weighty way of looking at it, is really important. But you've got to sequence stuff. And so there's a bit of strategy involved with what you want. And if you can't get what if you're facing a real barrier and you just know, find your ally, pivot to where you want, pivot to what you think might be acceptable, realize that there's still a long game to play, and I can make change over the long term. And you kind of chip away at the underside. Eventually the dragon has a soft spot in the belly where you can thrust the sword to get the change. I wouldn't suggest that because that's very graphic, and that's right, I can say that. Sorry, Claudine. As I said, sometimes being outspoken, you sometimes put foot in mouth, and that was a foot in mouth opportunity. but some may take that as being good, because the kind of the old boys club may be the dragon around the table at the end of the day, and so it's okay. But find allies, be thoughtful and strategic about what causes you take, keep your eye on the greater goal, and sequence stuff as you need to in order to make the change necessary.
I like that. Keep your eye on the greater goal. Keep that motivation with you at all times, and those small little steps, they may seem like they take a while, but you are making incremental change. I think it's awesome. Camille, from an athlete, you are very much an active, high performance athlete right now. So what kind of advice can you give to the other ladies on the board who are in positions of, running a board or looking to be on a board? What advice would you give them to help?
I mean, kind of like I said, I don't have a ton of experience on the board, but if there's one advice that I use as an athlete that I think could kind of translate, would be that every little step counts. So even things that you don't even think are making a difference right now, they probably are, and you'll see in the long run. But and it might take a while to see it, but every little step counts. Even for me, it's like if I want to cut my run 2 minutes short, it's like, no, I'm gonna hit that time or whatever. So same thing with decisions or making changes in the sport. Every little step counts, and if it's just motivating that one athlete to be themselves today, then that is a future leader. So it will make an impact.
Awesome. Yeah. One little step, and that one, if you impact one athlete's life in a positive way and change their journey, that will make a huge difference. That's awesome. Thank you. Claudine, what can you share with the ladies on the call tonight?
Okay, I think Zoe's comment on, I forget the language she used, but essentially what I gathered was incremental change, recognizing that everything doesn't have to take place overnight, or that if you have this giant project, that it is possible to consider a small piece of it a success. I think that's something that we oftentimes forget, that we want to diversify and be inclusive, and therefore we must have X amount of people from X amount of communities doing, so many things. And if that doesn't happen, then okay, diversification and inclusiveness is no longer on the table as something that we're doing. This could be a multi-generational process. So recognizing that and creating the space, recognizing that, going back to my answer before about creating inclusive and welcoming spaces is more important than checking off who's come. Because if you make the space welcoming, then people will come eventually. I think exercising humility in the process, which is something that's very difficult for a lot of us in doing things differently. Being able to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We are not necessarily the experts. We're simply in a position of change maker. but we might not know how to do that. So that thing I talk about making the space welcoming, maybe you don't know how to do that. Maybe you need to talk to the communities and say, what would make you, what would entice you to join us? You know, so asking those questions, whose voice is absent from this decision-making process, and how can I have access or create access in terms of learning more about those I don't know anything about. I think those things might be important as well.
You answered my follow-up question, buddy. I was gonna ask you, how do you create space if you don't have the space there? And I think you hit the nail on the head with the, you know, invite them to be part of the conversation. Ask what they need in that space. I think that that's fantastic. I've got a specific question for you, Claudine, in the chat box. I'm sure you're not surprised by this one, but further to your comments about moving the needle, how do we, and this is the general we, encourage young people to speak out or attempt to make change when there are heavy power imbalances and we know that they exist?
Yeah, I think that goes back to that humility thing on the part of who has leadership, who has the power. I mean, those of us with the power struggle to give it up. And if we want to be the encouraging people, if we want to encourage young people to speak out, then we have to relinquish that power. We have to empower them. We have to find ways to empower young people to understand that their voices have value, that they are as much a part of the community as the rest of us. And we forget. As a society, we tend to forget that. And that's part of the lacking of humility, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question, Anne, but I do think that it's about empowering the youth to speak for themselves, that no answers are stupid or bad. You know, no opinions are unwarranted in spaces where they're about you and your life and what you are going to experience.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And it's it's easier said than done. I love that you said, you know, we've worked hard. It's harder to give up our power once we've got it. And we know that, but I think recognizing that and owning that is the first step in creating space and allowing others to step into that space.
Yep.
So.
One of the things that we forget when we look back and talk about the movers and shakers in our history is how young many of them were. You know, Martin Luther King wasn't 30 years old before people were following him on marches across America. You know, our youth have power. They just need to be told that they have that power. They look at what's happened across North America for the past year as young people have decided enough is enough and have been marching every day for a year. You know, their voices are heard. They just have to be reminded that they have those voices.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. We've got some time. I would love to open the floor up to any questions from the participants on the line today. So feel free to raise your hand, which is a little icon, or throw a question into the chat box, or just unmute yourself and I should be able to see you. And once again, if you'd like to submit an anonymous question, please feel free to private message Kirsty, the other host, or myself. This is a great question. So this is a question for all of you. What initiatives have you seen in sport that you believe are creating positive change towards inclusion?
I think the safe sport movement is really positive, and the focus not just on prevention, but I think this is where Nova Scotia does a really, really good job. And I know Ilana personally. She was an athlete of mine when we were both younger. And I love how she promotes that it's about growing the box, about inclusion. It's about expanding sport to be a safe place for people to participate, that's open and inclusive. And I think that that slight change from a risk management perspective to a growth and in equity and inclusion point of view is so powerful. I think that will have long-lasting impact across the Canadian sport community. And we're seeing more sport officers and sport manager and safety sport managers come into play at organizations. So I think that organizations are seeing the purpose of that, and hopefully they'll adopt kind of the leading thought that's coming out of Nova Scotia in that area.
Oh, thanks, Zoe. We love Alana too. She is doing fantastic things with safe sport in Nova Scotia. We're so excited to have her on board. And I'm not sure if you can see in the chat box, but she says, "Thank you, Zoe. You've been my inspiration for so many years." So that's nice. Claudine or Camille, have you seen any initiatives or heard of any initiatives that you believe are creating positive change towards inclusion?
The things that Camille, sorry, did I just cut? Okay, sorry, I thought I cut Camille off. I didn't want to do that. I was thinking along the lines, not of official or organized initiatives, but more the things continuing with the empowerment of the youth. I've been seeing a lot of young people who have been using social media to broaden accessibility opportunities and options for people from the very communities. So thinking about racialized youth, for example, there are lots of young people across Canada and the US as well, who are doing things like, we don't see ourselves here, therefore we're making ourselves present, challenging large corporations, challenging Mac for not being in their advertising, those kinds of things. So those initiatives are grassroots, but they give me joy, because it again is empowering our youth to fight for themselves. So
that's awesome. And I think, giving our youth the opportunity to voice and to elevate their voice when they use it, I think is an important piece of that as well. So, supporting them when they step out into the space and are willing to stand up for themselves, helping provide them that support and that platform or that media, I think is really awesome. Camille, from a disabled athlete who participated in able-bodied sports the vast majority of your life, what kind of things helped you as an athlete outside of your parents? What were the things that you felt really helped support you going through that journey?
There's a lot of things, probably definitely hearing other stories. I remember one of the first thing I did is kind of look up other athletes with clubfoot, and I stumbled upon Benoit Huot, which is he's a swimmer. So just looking at other stories, and the great thing about social media and the internet now is that you can kind of find about anybody. So that was really good. The other thing is probably kind of like Zoe mentioned, but finding your allies, finding the people that believe in you, that think you're awesome just the way you are. And I definitely found those people, and that really helped me, just the people that will support you regardless. So I would say that was probably the two big things for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Zoe, I think that this question is probably mostly directed at you, but Claudine and Camille, if you would like to add in anything, please feel free. How can we push back against anti-trans policies in sport?
Thankfully, we don't live in the United States.
Yes. You
speak up. I think that, like Claudine said, social media is so powerful, and it can speak truth to power at times. That it's really important, and I think it's important to that I have trouble answering this because at times it's facts don't mean much. And I think that's in the anti-trans messaging, that's really apparent about all the benefits that sport in particular, the question around participation in high school sport and intercollegiate sport or recreational sport. But it's not based on fact. It's and as the press notes in the United States, is that many of the states where these anti-trans sport participation bills are being moved through is they can't even articulate if it's even happening in their state. And they look to Connecticut and Idaho as the only two cases in the United States that they can point to. And even I think the Connecticut case is flawed in some cases because one of the claimants actually did win state titles after she made the complaint. And it's like, I go, it's not true. But truth doesn't matter in this switch. So you have to, so the narrative has to change. So you've got to tell a compelling story about inclusion, about the benefits that it brings, about the importance to trans youth, and about how including them makes them stronger, makes them healthier, reduces the incidence of suicidal thought. And I think that so being able to tell that narrative, to be a storyteller with an opposite message to the anti-trans movement, that's where the key has to come in. And you hammer home the story through all channels of media, and you do it often, every day, all the time. And that's the only way you're going to change stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, you have to scream louder from the rooftops.
But you've got to scream, but you've got to be smart.
Yes.
And that's why, and that's why I think that people tend to fight with facts. Facts don't matter, as much as it tears me to say that. But being a storyteller makes more sense because that's the emotional level that where people respond. And if you can get them at the emotional level to respond positively towards you, then you'll make change.
That's very good advice. Bring in that emotional level. We're emotional. Sport is an emotional piece for a lot of us. It brings back those emotional memories. For some of us, really good ones, and for some of us, not so good ones. But it brings that emotion into it. Claudine or Camille, any advice or any thoughts to add? It's okay if you don't have anything.
I was waiting to see if Camille has something, but I think not. The idea that this isn't about facts or about it's not about reality. It really is about bias and bigotry. And I think one of the things that first comes to mind when I think about this is that we can't be complacent, because Zoe mentioned that, thank God we're not the US. But I think at the same time, we've said that many a time and seen similar things creeping into our politics and our policies. So, just think about reproductive rights issues and how something that we thought that, our parents had fought for are suddenly being, clawed away slowly across Canada. And so I think it's important that we keep our eye on what's happening, that we be hyper vigilant, because these are about issues of equity, and we don't want to see them being taken away from us.
Yes, thank you. Hyper vigilant. Oh my gosh, my words today. I tell you, hyper vigilant.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I think that's really important because, and I'm not an expert in this, and Claudine, if I state this wrongly, please, you can call me out on it. But one thing that happened in the United States was that, with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, people thought, you're 20, 30 years on, it's all solved. And then people did become complacent. And now just look what's happening. And I think that being vigilant, you may take your foot off the pedal a tiny bit, but if you take it right off, game's over. And so you do need to be vigilant in order to keep the message going. And I think, the voting rights situation in the United States is really, a story that and a narrative that everyone should be aware of. On the trans side, I think, and the reason why I say, I'm glad to live in Canada is because in Canada, both federally and in every province across the country, the human rights codes protect gender expression and gender identity. That does not exist in the United States, and that's part of the reason why things like the Equality Act, which will never get passed by the Senate, unfortunately, is really important, because it enshrines those human rights, which trans rights are human rights, into the laws of the land. Fortunately, in Canada, we have that. Do people disagree and have different biases towards transgender people? Absolutely, they do. But there is a level of protection in Canada that just does not exist in the United States, in most cases.
Yes, that is true. Got one last question for the group today. And if we didn't answer your question, please feel free to email me and I can ask the question to the panelists and send that out after the fact. We're gonna end with this one. So what advice would you give on initiating conversations with traditionally underrepresented communities to invite participation into the sports that we represent? So how do you start that conversation? And whoever is ready.
I just, so people know, I actually have I carry a little card with this. This is shut up and listen. That's something that I actually write down for me every day. So I was trying to practice that, just so you know. But I'm going to take the opportunity. And I think in the LGBT community, sport is not a friendly place, period. It's unfortunate. And how do you go speak to that community? You need leaders, people like Mark Tewksbury, for example, and there's, because I was seeing stuff with Mark earlier today. It's really important that, LGBTQ athletes need to take a more public profile through their organizations, and through places like the Canadian Olympic Committee that has a high profile, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, which has a high profile. Those things are really important. But it's also important that the NSOs and the PSOs tell stories about LGBTQ plus people, and so they are visible. I think Claudia made the point. If I can't see myself there, why would I join? It's that simple. And then when you start to create the safe space around them, go and listen to them. And the biggest part about listening to people is you have to take yourself right out of the conversation as a leader. And it's so difficult to do. Like I said, shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Because listening is more powerful than speaking.
Yes, thank you.
I think in some cases it's about if the group won't come to you, maybe you go to them. So I mean, this has been done through grassroots sporting movements for, forever, like actually providing access to the sport inside those communities. So that there isn't that stigma or that fear or that belief that you can't participate in that sport. And you see it happening in like in Nova Scotia, we have, for example, there's surfing in the African Nova Scotian community now. There's a program, so there are examples in the province that we can think of where that's happening. But I think that at least starts a conversation. And I think sometimes that's all you need to have is like, hey, there are kids in the community who are doing that. Why don't you come on down to insert place here and join us and, be a part of our team or be, those kinds of things. And ambassadors, I think, as Zoe said, are important. Having leaders from the community who are then going to introduce members of the community to the broader sporting community are important.
Thank you. Camille, I feel like you've got something to add.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking from more of a physical impairment standpoint. I remember having a conversation with one of my teammates who's completely blind, and she was saying how she had just moved to a new place, a new city, and she wanted to go for a hike, but she needs a guide. She needs someone to kind of help her around. So and for high performance sports, that is provided. And once you get into that, it's really, the organization takes part of that. But for recreational sports, they don't always have those type of access. So just, I don't know, starting a sort of group or something. Just realizing that there's people out there that want to do things, but their physical ability to won't allow them. So making sure that they're able to get that and able to get what they need. Yeah.
Camille, that's so awesome. And I think like the point that both you and Claudine made is sport may have to look, or physical activity may have to look different than what you traditionally offer in order to get that new community on board or involved in your sport. And I think to surf, and when they started, they just opened it up, free surf lessons, like for East or North Preston, I think they started it with. And they just had free surf lessons. And then they couldn't understand why no one showed up until they went into the community and had conversations with the community and realized that fear of water is such a culturally ingrained piece that the kids wouldn't even go to the beach, let alone get on a surfboard on the beach, on the ocean. Like it was one of those things. So they worked to create a swim program so that the swim program could support the surf program, which now they have. We've got black surfers, and they're in movies and in TV shows now because it's such a unique experience and a unique thing. But it's that how involving the community in that conversation and going and asking them what it was that they needed or what that piece is, and that someone blind moving to a new area, you can't go for a hike if you don't have a guide. That's obvious to them, but maybe that's not obvious to us. So having that conversation and opening that door is really that first step. And Kirsty, thank you to always reminding me. Resport is an initiative through Sport Nova Scotia, and it's all about coming up with ideas and helping create and make sport more accessible and inclusive for Nova Scotia. So if you've got an idea, you want to try something crazy, reach out to Resport, and we'd love to hear from you. So I've taken you over time, but I just want to say thank you so much to Claudine, Camille, and Zoe for being with us this evening. There's lots of thank you messages in the chat, and they're wonderful. And Camille, good luck on your Paralympic journey. We are all rooting for you.
Thank you, guys.
Be awesome.
So yes, so thank you all for being with us tonight. We really, truly appreciate your time. I've got a couple little last housekeeping things for you. We've got our VIP coaching program that is through the CSCA. We have our coach mentorship program that is run through the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, and applications for that are now open. Kirsty will pop the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic website into the chat box for you all. And our next session for the Female Leadership Series is going to be on Wednesday, May the 12th. That will be our final session for the series. So we'll have an exciting panel for you all. We're just confirming our speakers. So a big, huge thank you once again to Zoe, to Camille, and to Claudine for being here this evening. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and being so open with us.
Thank you for the
Thanks for having
invitation.
us.
It was awesome.
Thanks for having us.